There are stories in the human bloodline that science alone cannot explain, and mysteries in the human soul that history has yet to uncover. When we speak about the Igbo of Nigeria and the Ethiopians of the Horn of Africa, we are not merely tracing ancestry, we are uncovering a connection that transcends geography, language, and time itself. This is the story of two peoples bound not just by proximity or migration, but by something far deeper, something that whispers through their DNA, echoing a shared divinity within their blood. Across the plains of Africa, countless civilizations rose and fell, but few left such distinct yet intertwined footprints as the Igbo and the Ethiopians. Both peoples carry a legacy that predates colonial lines and political maps. Their stories are not just historical, they are spiritual in essence, cultural in resonance, and scientific in evidence. When we examine their languages, customs, and ancient traditions, we begin to notice something fascinating, patterns that suggest not coincidence, but connection. For centuries, the Ethiopians have been seen as one of Africa's most ancient civilizations, guardians of a history that survived invasion, isolation, and attempts at erasure. Ethiopia stood as a beacon of sovereignty while the rest of Africa was being carved apart. Yet as we move westward to the lands of the Igbo, we find another story of resilience, intelligence, and divine intuition. The Igbo people, scattered across the eastern regions of Nigeria, hold traditions that mirror ancient Ethiopian practices. From their reverence for ancestry to their sacred naming systems, from their symbols to their philosophies about creation, there exists a remarkable overlap that demands deeper exploration. Modern genetics and anthropology have begun to uncover what oral traditions have whispered for generations, that the African bloodline is not fragmented but fluid, interconnected across thousands of miles. The Igbo and the Ethiopians may share more than cultural similarities. They might share strands of ancestral DNA that trace back to a single origin. Ethiopia, often referred to as one of the birthplaces of humanity, may have served as a gateway for migrations that spread not only people but knowledge, language, and divine consciousness across the continent. What makes this discovery extraordinary is not just the potential biological connection, but the shared spiritual philosophy found in both groups. Both the Igbo and the Ethiopians view humanity as carriers of divine essence, a belief that the Creator resides within, not above. In Igbo cosmology, there is a saying, Chabuanye, meaning God is a person, implying that divinity dwells inside every being. Likewise, Ethiopian traditions have long upheld the idea that humanity was formed in the image of something greater, not as servants of the divine, but as reflections of it. This belief system births a deep sense of dignity and purpose, a recognition that within every African person lies the spark of creation itself. If we look closely, this ideology is not limited to philosophy, it is encoded in how both peoples live. The Igbo concept of umuna emphasizes family unity, shared responsibility, and respect for lineage. Similarly, Ethiopian society is built around the strength of community, where every person carries an obligation to uplift the next. Both cultures built civilizations rooted in moral order, wisdom, and shared progress, not material dominance. This, perhaps, is the real DNA of divinity, a collective consciousness that values life, harmony, and spiritual balance over conquest and greed. Science tells us that mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal ancestry, can link populations separated by continents and centuries. Some genetic studies suggest that the Igbo people, like many in West Africa, share ancient markers with East African populations. But what makes the Igbo-Ethiopian link remarkable is that beyond genetics, they share an intuitive sense of belonging to something sacred, something eternal. It's as though the blood remembers what history forgot. History, of course, was never written by the Africans themselves. It was rewritten, reframed, and distorted by foreign powers who could not understand the depth of Africa's interconnectedness. The borders drawn by colonial empires divided a continent that had always been united by migration, trade, and shared spiritual philosophy. The Igbo and the Ethiopians were never strangers. They were relatives separated by the rivers of time and rewritten history. When you study the symbols of the Igbo and Dubi writing and compare them to the ancient Ethiopian gaze script, echoes of shared origins emerge. not identical but spiritually aligned. The question then arises, could this be coincidence, or could it be memory encoded within DNA? Science may not have all the answers, but culture often speaks before science can prove it. The Igbo people's myths of origin often point eastward toward the rising sun, to lands that some traditions call Aries home. In many oral histories, the East is seen as the direction of beginnings, the birthplace of humanity, and what lies in the east of Africa, Ethiopia, the land of first light, where human fossils older than any found elsewhere still whisper the story of humanity's dawn. The Ethiopians, too, have oral traditions that speak of movements westward, of tribes and families migrating to distant lands. Could these migrations have seeded the roots of the Igbo people? Could it be that both groups are descendants of the same ancestral flame, dispersed across the continent to preserve and spread wisdom? If so, then the African diaspora, both within and beyond Africa, is not a scattering but a deliberate pattern of life. Every lineage, every language, every rhythm of the drum connects back to that original divine pulse. When we understand this, everything changes. The story of Africa is no longer one of division but of unity. The narrative of weakness is replaced by the truth of divine strength. For centuries, the world has tried to separate Africans by tribe, by language, by border, but DNA tells a different story. It says that you cannot divide the river from its source, nor the people from their origin. The greatness of the Igbo and Ethiopian bloodlines lies not just in their endurance, but in their capacity to remember who they are. Despite centuries of colonization, enslavement, and distortion, both peoples have preserved fragments of divine memory, codes of honor, art, music, and wisdom that the world is only beginning to appreciate. This is not about claiming superiority. It is about reclaiming truth. The African story is not one of inferiority but of infinite potential. The DNA of divinity within the Igbo and Ethiopians is not mystical. It is the living reminder that humanity began in Africa and that the first light of civilization still burns in its people. The world's earliest architecture, mathematics, spiritual systems, and social laws were born on African soil. To deny that is to deny the truth of human progress. To reclaim it is to awaken a sleeping giant. What does this mean for the world today? It means that identity is not a matter of color, it is a matter of consciousness. Every African, no matter where they are born, carries a piece of the world's beginning within them. When the Igbo look east, they are not just looking toward a place, they are looking toward their reflection in the Ethiopian highlands. In the same way, Ethiopians see their reflection in the strength and ingenuity of the Igbo people. Together they form the living proof that Africa was never a divided continent. It was one body with many faces, one soul with many languages. So perhaps the question is not whether the Igbo and Ethiopian bloodlines are one. The real question is whether we, as a people, can recognize the unity that already exists within us. Can we look past names, tribes, and nations and see the divine spark that connects us all? Can we understand that within our DNA lies the memory of kings, queens, builders, poets, and philosophers? The story of the Igbo and Ethiopian bloodlines is not just theirs. It is a mirror of all humanity, reminding us that we are more than what history has written. In the end, the blood remembers. The truth cannot be erased by maps or rewritten by power. The DNA of divinity continues to flow through generations, through struggles, through victories, and through us. And when the world finally recognizes the connection between the Igbo and the Ethiopians, it will not just be an African awakening, it will be a human awakening, because to rediscover where we come from is to rediscover who we truly are. Within every African lineage, there is a pulse that transcends time, a rhythm that carries the memory of creation itself. It beats quietly in every heartbeat, whispering stories older than pyramids and empires. This pulse is not merely biological, it is spiritual, cultural, and eternal. When we speak of the blood remembering, we speak of the silent testimony written into our very being. It is the living archive of who we are, who we have been, and what we were destined to become. The blood is not just red with life, it is golden with memory. It carries the vibrations of ancestors who walked under ancient suns, who carved wisdom into stone, who sang to the skies and called the stars by name. There are things the world may erase from history books, but there are truths that cannot be erased from the human essence. Colonizers rewrote timelines, empires distorted narratives, and conquerors buried knowledge beneath centuries of silence. Yet the blood has never forgotten. It still remembers the first drumbeat that echoed through the valleys of the Nile. It remembers the unity of tribes before borders, when one language of spirit connected every man, woman, and child from the Horn of Africa to the Atlantic coast. The blood remembers the moment when creation kissed the earth and called humanity forth from African soil. It remembers the hands that built, the voices that prayed, the souls that dreamed, and the hearts that endured. Science speaks of DNA as a genetic code, but there is something more profound that runs alongside those sequences of molecules. The blood does not simply pass on features. It transmits identity, courage, and purpose. It is as if the memory of struggle and triumph is encoded deep within our cells. Every descendant of Africa carries within them an ancestral signal, a resonance of something divine. The blood remembers not just pain but greatness. It holds the echoes of queens who ruled with wisdom and kings who governed with compassion. It holds the courage of warriors who stood unbroken against oppression, the resilience of mothers who carried generations through storms, and the brilliance of thinkers who birthed civilizations long before the world acknowledged their existence. When the world told Africans they were inferior, the blood whispered otherwise. It whispered of pyramids that touched the heavens, of scholars who measured the stars, of healers who understood the secrets of the earth. Even when shackles were placed on bodies, the blood carried freedom within. Even when names were taken, the blood preserved identity. Even when stories were burned, the blood kept writing its truth across time. The blood remembers the songs sung in hidden tongues, the prayers said beneath the moonlight, and the silent vows to never forget who we are. It remembers everything. That is why across oceans, across centuries, and across continents, the descendants of Africa still carry the same rhythm in their veins. Whether Igbo, Ethiopian, Zulu, Yoruba, Akan, or any of the 1,000 nations born from the same source, the spirit within the blood recognizes itself. It is a connection that transcends distance, a bond so deep that when one African rises, the ancestors rejoice from every corner of the earth. The blood knows no border. It travels through time and across geography with an unbreakable thread that links the living to those who came before. The world has tried to make Africans forget their great. Through colonization, slavery, and systemic erasure, history was distorted to make the people doubt the power within their own veins. But what the oppressor could never touch was the sacred memory that exists in the blood. It cannot be diluted, it cannot be rewritten, and it cannot be destroyed. The blood carries the truth that Africa was and still is the cradle of civilization. It holds the evidence that greatness was born there and never left. It simply evolved, adapted, and survived. Every African child is a continuation of a story that began at the dawn of time. When they walk, they carry the footsteps of ancestors who crossed deserts and seas. When they speak, they echo the wisdom of voices that shaped the world's earliest philosophies. When they dream, they awaken the divine spark that has never faded. The blood remembers where it came from, and that memory gives birth to destiny. You cannot separate a person from their origin any more than you can separate the sun from its light. The blood also remembers the pain, the suffering, and the injustice, but not as chains to hold us down. It remembers them as lessons, as reminders of endurance. It remembers so that we can transform that pain into purpose, that loss into learning, and that struggle into strength. Within every African lineage is the power to rise again and again, because resilience is not learned. It is inherited. It is part of the divine code written into the DNA of every descendant. When we say the blood remembers, we speak of more than genetic inheritance. We speak of spiritual continuity. We speak of the invisible bond between the living and the dead, between those who built the past and those who will shape the future. The blood does not forget its mission. It keeps calling us home, reminding us of our shared responsibility to honor our ancestors by becoming the fullness of who we are. So when an African looks to another and feels an unspoken connection, it is not coincidence. It is recognition. It is the blood remembering it. It is the ancient call that transcends words and awakens something powerful within the soul. It is the realization that our greatness was never lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered. And when the children of Africa finally rise to that awareness, when they realize that their bloodline is sacred and eternal, the world will once again see what true divinity looks like when it walks in human form. The blood remembers not only the beginning but also the promise. The promise that no matter how many centuries pass, no matter how many narratives are twisted, the truth will always find its way back. The pulse that began in the heart of Africa still beats in the hearts of its people today. It beats in the rhythm of drums, in the laughter of children, in the pride of a generation rediscovering its worth. It beats as a reminder that the past was not just about survival, it was about preservation so that one day the world would know the truth. The blood in that remembrance lies our resurrection. It tells us that we are not the descendants of slaves. We are the descendants of creators, builders, philosophers, and dreamers. We are not defined by chains, but by the courage that broke them. We are not lost. We are simply awakened. And as the blood continues to whisper through generations, it carries one timeless message. You were never ordinary. You were divine from the beginning. Tribe, language, and geography were never meant to divide the children of Africa. They were meant to be colors in one vast tapestry, a symphony of differences that together formed the rhythm of a single heartbeat. The concept of division was never ours. It was planted, imposed, and taught before borders were drawn, before flags and names replaced shared identity. Africa was one continuous flow of people, knowledge, and purpose. The Igbo in the West and the Ethiopians in the East were not strangers on opposite sides of a continent. They were branches of the same ancient tree, rooted in the same sacred soil. Each leaf carried its own shape and hue, but all drew from the same source of life. Long before ships and colonial maps, there were paths across the Sahara, rivers that carried messages, and trade routes that connected the heart of Africa to the edges of the world. Merchants, scholars, and spiritual teachers moved freely, exchanging not just goods but wisdom. The Igbo people, known for their innovation and communal harmony, reflected the same cultural heartbeat that pulsed through the highlands of Ethiopia, where civilization thrived in strength and faith. When we peel back the layers of time, we begin to see that what seemed like separation was only distance. What seemed like difference was only expression. The idea of tribe, as it was defined later, was never intended to divide. In its true form, a tribe was simply an extended family, a group bound by common ancestry, shared values, and collective purpose. But when outsiders arrived, they redrew those lines, exaggerated the differences, and planted seeds of mistrust where harmony once lived. They renamed unity as fragmentation. They taught Africans to see themselves as divided, when in truth, the continent had always been interconnected through ancestry and shared spiritual code. The Igbo's concept of Omuna community, rooted in family, and the Ethiopian ideal of Adder, solidarity in life and in death, echo the same philosophy of unity through compassion. Different names, same essence. When we look deeper into language, we find threads that tie these cultures together in astonishing ways. The root words for light, life, and spirit in ancient Ethiopian languages resonate with similar sounds and meanings in various West African dialects. These are not coincidences. They are remnants of a linguistic bridge that once connected the continent from east to west. Before writing was formalized, oral tradition carried these links forward through proverbs, songs, and spiritual chants. Across centuries, the voice of one people became the echo of another, forming a network of memory that no empire could erase. Geography was never a wall, it was a pathway. The deserts, mountains, and forests were not obstacles but corridors through which ideas and bloodlines flowed. Migration was not abandonment, it was expansion. The ancestors did not wander aimlessly. They carried light with them, spreading the flame of wisdom, agriculture, architecture, and spirituality from the valleys of Ethiopia to the plains of Nigeria. The same sense of divine purpose that inspired ancient Ethiopian builders to raise monuments toward the heavens is the same that inspired Igbo craftsmen to build societies rooted in balance and order. Though the world sees them as separate, they were reflections of one spiritual design, one human experiment guided by a higher rhythm. To understand unity beyond borders is to see Africa not as a collection of nations, but as a living organism. Each region, each people, each language is a vital organ of that body. Ethiopia is the heartbeat, pulsating with ancient memory. The Igbo are the hands, skilled and industrious, shaping the future. The Nile and the Niger are the arteries that carry the blood of culture and creativity across the land. When one part suffers, the whole body feels the pain. When one part rises, the entire body is uplifted. Division weakens, but unity strengthens, always has, always will. This unity is not just cultural, it is genetic. The same strands of DNA that link an Ethiopian child to the mountains of Axum link an Igbo child to the valleys of the Niger. Their differences are superficial, their similarities profound. Even in the way they view the divine, both see creation not as distant or abstract, but as intimately tied to human existence. Both understand that to honor the Creator is to honor life itself. This shared philosophy is proof that long before there were borders or nations, there was one consciousness, a collective awareness that humanity itself was sacred. But centuries of division did not erase the truth, they only buried it under layers of misunderstanding. The colonial powers used maps and schools to teach Africans to think of themselves as fragmented pieces, rather than parts of a masterpiece. They changed languages, renamed rivers and rewrote histories to create separation. Yet beneath all that, the spirit of unity never died. It lived in music, in art, in the unspoken respect for ancestors. It lived in the silent recognition between people who looked different, yet felt the same. The Igbo drums and Ethiopian chants still echo the same rhythm, one that says, "We are one people, one story, one soul." True unity is not the erasure of diversity, it is the harmony of it. Just as every note in a song has its own pitch and tone, every tribe has its role in the great composition of Africa. The Igbo's strength in commerce, innovation, and community complements Ethiopia's endurance, spirituality, and ancient wisdom. Together they represent the balance between progress and preservation, between motion and memory. This is what Africa was always meant to be, a continent not competing within itself, but complementing itself. When Africans begin to see beyond the illusions of separation, a powerful awakening takes place. The understanding that we share one root, one origin, one divine pulse, is the beginning of transformation. The moment we realize that our strength is collective, not individual, the world changes. The power of unity is not in words, it is in awareness. When one African understands the connection between the Igbo and the Ethiopian, they begin to see that the entire continent is one extended family. This realization is not just about pride, it is about destiny. Africa's healing, rebirth, and rise depend on remembering its unity. No nation can rise alone, no tribe can thrive in isolation. The time has come to remember that unity is not something we must create, it is something we must rediscover. It has always been there, pulsing in our hearts, calling us back to ourselves. The Igbo and Ethiopian connection is not a new story, it is an ancient reminder of what has always been true. We are many expressions of one soul, many voices of one song, many branches of one divine tree. And when that realization becomes collective, when the descendants of Africa stand together in understanding and respect, then the continent will no longer be seen as divided lands, but as one living force, powerful enough to change the world again just as it did in the beginning. For unity beyond borders is not a dream, it is the original design, the divine blueprint written into every African heart.